episode of the BioHub. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Micah Mackison, who's the CEO of Vico Therapeutics, a clinical stage biotech who are developing RNA-based therapies for neurological diseases like Huntington's. Over the past 2 decades, Micah has held senior roles across corporate development, strategy, and finance at companies including Eli Lilly, Pfizer, Ovation Pharmaceuticals, and Assembly Biosciences and Locanabio. And he's helped shape transformative deals, grow pipelines, and bring cutting-edge science closer to patients. So join us today as we'll talk through Vico's pipeline, operating as a transatlantic company, as well as what's next for Vico. So Micah, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing well, Tom. Hey, thanks very much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. So look, let's start off with a little bit about yourself. So you've had a rich journey through biotech, so from corporate development and venture capital to now leading Vico as CEO. Talk us through your journey, and were there any specific mentors who influenced that journey?
Yeah, well, like a lot of folks probably in my position, it's not a straight line. You don't, it never really works out how you plan it, which is probably the way that it should be. Started my career as a finance guy in a big pharma company, Eli Lilly. Not quite sure where I wanted to go, wasn't incredibly familiar with the industry at that point. But what it did offer me was the ability to learn a lot and really kind of fall in love with the industry, what we're doing, and the focus on the patients. And so I just followed my gut in a lot of ways, and navigating through a couple of large organizations, and then finding my way into smaller companies where I've been for almost 20 years, the great majority of that time in biotechs, and also developing an interest in rare disease and in neuro, and also even within the indications that I've started in. I've developed a great appreciation for what the patients and the families go through, especially for therapies that don't have any disease modifying, or indications that don't have any disease modifying therapies. So as I've sort of navigated my way through these companies, have found an interest in business development, spent a lot of years there doing deals. And as I then went through to the leadership route, if you will, was introduced to Vico, working in disease areas that I was quite familiar with, had a strong personal and professional interest in. And it's been a great 3 years since I've started here. We were preclinical when I started. We've now gone through a few years of clinical trials, had some interesting results, and it's been a great journey along the way. Not, as I said, not exactly what I planned, but I wouldn't change anything. And I've had, honestly, too many great mentors to mention along the way. Really, at every company, I think you can take a little bit out of everybody that you work with, whether that's your direct supervisor, your peers, or even sometimes your subordinates. You can learn a lot from all of those in a 360 way.
Nice. And before Vico, you worked at Locanabio, Assembly, and Lundbeck, which all had very deep focus in neuroscience. Can you talk us through your passion for Huntington's disease and where you think the genetic medicine space is currently?
Yeah, it all started actually at Ovation Pharma, where we were working on rare neurological diseases, including Huntington's chorea. There we launched the first drug ever for any form of Huntington's. That was tetrabenazine, which we got approved by the FDA in early 2009. We were then quickly acquired by Lundbeck shortly after that. And that was my first introduction to rare neurological diseases, and specifically neurodegeneration. Didn't know it at the time, but many years later discovered that a friend of mine was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. And that renewed an interest in me. And I joined a company called Locanabio, which was a gene therapy company working on trinucleotide repeat diseases, including Huntington's and others. And then the opportunity with Vico came about as well, to go even a bit deeper into the Huntington space, and also the spinocerebellar ataxias. The spinocerebellar ataxias and Huntington's disease are all caused by the same mutation, the CAG repeat expansion. And so we have a drug at Vico that directly targets the CAG repeat expansion. In fact, it's the only drug that's currently in clinical development that has that specific target. And so, my interest really was trying to get at the source of the disease, being in genetic medicine, and we're directly targeting the source of these diseases, the mutation that causes the toxic proteins.
Yeah. You've worked at so many different types of companies before, small and large. What was it about Vico Therapeutics that convinced you that this was the right next place in your career? I guess what made that opportunity in particular stand out against others?
Yeah, it was, I had been through a couple of organizations that had been similarly sized when I joined, kind of in the 10 to 20-ish employees, and grew those up to about 75 to about 250 or so, a couple of opportunities. So when I joined Vico, it was very similar to that. We had about 20 or so people, maybe a little bit more at the time. And I understood the playbook, right? When you've seen it a few times, that is, you have a better sense of how to manage that size of an organization, and also how to manage the growth of that size of an organization, right? You can easily double the company pretty quickly. We haven't done that. We've been pretty measured in how we've expanded our team, and for the most part, have been reasonably successful to date. But I like this size of a company. This is my sweet spot, if you will, if I had one. You can learn a lot in large organizations. It's hard to get the depth in a lot of those organizations in addition to the breadth. And you can probably get one or the other, but you probably can't get both. And in smaller organizations, you can get very deep, sometimes too far into the weeds, but it doesn't take very long to take a step back and get very high level with it as well, being such a small organization.
Yeah. And just to delve into Vico's pipeline then, so you guys target a unique set of neurodegenerative disorders using antisense oligonucleotides. Can you talk us through the pipeline, the lead program, what makes the approach different from others in the space, and where do you see it having the biggest impact?
Yeah, so you're right. We do focus exclusively on antisense oligos for neurological diseases. That's where our research expertise and our clinical expertise resides. Our lead program is called VO659, and as I mentioned, it targets all CAG repeat, or what are called polyglutamine diseases. There are about 9 of those diseases in total that are all caused by this same mutation. So VO659 is a bit of a pipeline in a drug opportunity where we can go after multiple indications. That's pretty rare in genetic disease. Usually it's a single target, single disease, or single mutation, single disease. So this is a bit different in that aspect, and that's in part what makes VO659 quite unique. But in addition to that, we're working on a program for Rett syndrome, an early stage program in a genetic form of Alzheimer's, and some very early targets that we haven't fully disclosed yet, but are quite interested in as well. So when you're a clinical stage company, you often get defined by your lead program. We often do as well, which we understand, but there is a much deeper bench behind that of ASOs that we're developing for other severe neurodiseases that are similar in size and scope to that of Huntington's or the ataxias.
Yeah, very good. And as you look ahead to the next 12 to 18 months for Vico, what do you think is next for you guys? Are there any particular milestones or developments that you guys are particularly excited about?
Yeah, so the last 6 to 9 months have been pretty exciting for us. We've had some clinical data that we presented towards the end of last year from the first three cohorts, 3 dose levels of VO659 in the clinic. That demonstrated that we were clearly on target in both our Huntington's and SCA patients. And so now we are about to take a larger step forward into a fourth cohort where we're going to be studying a much larger number of patients over a longer period of time, both in Huntington's and in spinocerebellar ataxia type 3 and type 1 patients. What this is really going to enable us to do is look much more beyond the on-target profile and also look at the right dose and dose regimen. So we know that we're on target. Now it's about refining it to getting the right dose and the dosing frequency right, because we do have a very long half-life. And we think we can give this drug relatively infrequently, perhaps as infrequent as every 6 months. And so we're very excited to start actually in the next couple of months dosing patients in our fourth cohort, where we'll be looking at a total of 20 Huntington's patients and 12 SCA3 patients and up to 6 SCA1 patients over a 1-year dosing period. And so that is coming up here in the very near term. We would expect to have some interim results from that probably around the middle of next year, probably Q3 timeframe. And then the full data set would likely be at the end of next year or early part of 27. So those are our immediate focus of things that we're working on today. And, quite excited that we can get some additional patients in and also get some data in the not too distant future.
Nice. And I guess just a separate point, are you guys looking at another round within that time, or like what's the situation on the funding side?
Yeah, well, just like I think everybody else in the biotech world, we're in the process of raising capital as well. So that side obviously is been challenging for the last few years, really for the entire market. And I do think that we are a bit advantaged in the fact that we are in the clinical stage and we have some early data. We're now looking to refine that data. And so I think we're probably in a better position than many, but it still remains a pretty tough environment. In any case, we are earlier this year, we kicked off what would be our Series C financing. We've raised a little less than 100 million to date in a Series A and a Series B. And now we're planning on our Series C to support the study I just described and beyond. In fact, we think that this next raise actually could potentially fund us through an NDA submission for our first indication.
Nice. Yeah, that's good to hear. I know so many companies are struggling at the moment, so it's good to hear you guys have made some good progress with that. And Vico, so you have operations in both the US and the Netherlands. How does that geographic footprint shape how you operate, collaborate, and think about growth, especially when it comes to talent, partnerships, clinical development? I think you see a lot of companies that will maybe start in Europe and then eventually get to the US. How have you found that from a cultural, talent, partnership, clinical perspective?
Yeah, so I had worked in Europe in the past. I am based in the US now. I'd worked in Europe in the past, so I had familiarity working with European companies. So that wasn't much of a challenge. But I tell you, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, obviously a lot of terrible things happened as a result of the pandemic. One of the good things, I guess, is that we learned how to work a bit remotely, or at least separated for the most part. And so that's actually come in quite handy here as well. So I can have access to, it's sort of the best of both worlds, right? Have access to things that are happening in here with the US, the FDA, and US investors, while the team is progressing our program in Europe. With antisense oligonucleotides, often is the case where drugs will initially be developed clinically in Europe or other parts of the world and then come to the US. No different for us. We're a European company, but aside from the geographical aspect of it, it does strategically make sense to develop this initially in Europe before coming to the US, and that is in fact our strategy as well. So far so good on that front. We just have a couple of employees, myself and our head of business development in the US. Our chief medical officer is in Switzerland, a legacy Roche colleague who had spent many years there, also in Huntington's. And then everybody else, though, is in the Netherlands. And so we're still pretty centralized, despite the fact that a few of us are in other parts of the world.
Nice. I was speaking to a company based in France, and they said having their R&D in France versus the US, it saved them like 30-40%
on their costs? Like, I imagine that's something you've noticed quite a lot as well.
Absolutely. That was a bit eye-opening. I didn't fully appreciate that prior to coming to the US, but the cost basis is quite substantially less in Europe, and particularly in the Netherlands. And so we're able to get a lot more done with less. Our burn rate is relatively low. We have about 35 or so employees now, and people are quite surprised at how low our burn is with that number of employees. So it does make sense, not just strategically, but also financially, to have operations in Europe as well.
Yeah, and there's obviously some unbelievable talent in the Netherlands and in the surrounding areas of Europe as well. So yeah.
Yeah. One other thing I didn't appreciate too, specifically, we're based in Leiden, so just a little outside of Amsterdam, and the Leiden Bioscience Park has an enormous amount of talent, expertise, also specifically in genetic medicine, so ASOs and gene therapy. Much of that because of the Leiden University Medical Center, which is right there. And we are a stone's throw away from that. We're currently based in the Leiden Bioscience Park, and so there's a number of other great companies that are in that ecosystem. So we certainly take advantage of our location there as well.
Nice. And just I guess a question back to you. So you've stepped into Vico as a first-time CEO. How has that been in terms of, was there any lessons or challenges that you faced along the way? Any shifts in perspective that may have surprised you as well? How did you find that transition from,
Yeah, that's always a tricky transition, right? In going into the CEO position for the first time. I got lucky and I found the right opportunity, a disease area that I understood quite well, a manageable size team. We weren't too big of an organization, and we knew what we needed to do. The playbook was pretty well understood. And so I got a bit lucky in coming into a situation like that, where I felt quite comfortable from the start. Of course, we run into challenges, lots of things that are unanticipated, that you never really plan for, that you have to adjust. There, it's really about having the right team around you to help manage through those situations. And again, we have a wonderful team, our CSO, our CMO, the rest of our senior team, and really the broader organization. They've been around the block a few times, and so they've seen challenges as well, and we know how to navigate those, right? I think one of a couple of the biggest challenges I think facing the market right now, one we've talked about, is the financing, right? Everybody is raising money now, whether you need it now, you needed it 6 months ago, or you're going to need it a year from now. So everybody's out in the market, and we're not in the best environment. So that's something that we have to adjust and adapt to. The regulatory landscape, certainly in the US, is sort of shifting underneath our feet. But we focus on the things that we can control. We can't control the financing markets. We can't control the regulatory environment. We have to be able to focus on what we can actually execute on, and that is developing novel therapies, executing on clinical trials. That's what we're good at, and so that's where we'll keep our focus, and the rest of the things will sort themselves out over time.
Yeah, very good. And this is a question we always finish with on the BioHub, and I know I wanted to give you a heads up on this, but if you were to pick 3 people to have dinner with, past or present, who would they be and why? Don't necessarily need to be biotech innovators, although they can be if you like, but yeah, 3 people for dinner.
Oh, that's a good one. I'd say I'd probably want a leader, somebody from the leadership ranks. Abraham Lincoln certainly comes to mind. Somebody that can take an incredibly difficult situation and figure out how to navigate that successfully, and try to bring the country back together. I'd love to pick his brain on the private moments that he went through and thinking about that. I'd probably select an innovator. Thomas Edison is arguably one of the greatest contributors to the modern industrial revolution. In his inventions and innovations that he's made. That would be interesting. And then I'd probably select someone from the broader entertainment category. As a bit of a sports fan, I'd say probably Muhammad Ali would be a quite interesting person to have. He also is grew up in a town not far from where I grew up as well, a bit of a hometown hero in many ways, but also much more than just a boxer. A supreme entertainer, a philanthropist, and somebody that is known to tell a good joke every now and then too, to keep the table lighthearted. So I think that's probably where I'd go. Somebody from leadership, somebody from innovation, and somebody to keep things light and fun.
Yeah, good. Well, look, 3 terrific answers there, and thanks so much for coming on and helping us out with this. I think you've given a really unique perspective, and certainly a company I'm definitely going to be following going forward. So, yeah, Micah, thanks again for helping us out with this.
Well, Tom, thanks very much for this opportunity. By the way, I know I've mentioned this to you in the past. I think you guys are doing a really good thing here. It's a nice way to differentiate yourselves as well. So very much appreciate the opportunity to come on to share more about Vico, to talk with you, and all the best to you guys, and keep doing the great work that you're doing.